Thank you. This is being recorded. So we have with us, helping us with the tech this evening, Ollie Feldman from Sherith. So we're very appreciative that you're with us today, Ollie. Yeah, there's a wave. Thank you. Very mindful that you all could be at other programs, even at Sherith tonight. There's a demand for your attention, and I appreciate that you're at this program, and think that you will find it very worthwhile. I co-chair the Congregation Sherith Israel Dayenu Circle, as well as the Climate Action Team at Sherith Israel with Nancy Sheftel Gomes. And we have with us this evening 3 speakers, and more will be said about them at the time that they individually speak. The chat is going to be disabled until towards the end of the program, with one exception. You'll be able to submit questions into chat as you think of them, but we aren't going to actually address questions until all of the speakers have had a chance to speak, because they may answer some of the questions that you raise. So feel free to include that. When you're not speaking, if you could keep yourself on mute, that would help with the audio aspect of this. With that, we are going to start with an invocation by one of our speakers, Rob Chaikin, and more about Rob's background a little bit later. But Rob received a Bachelor's of Science in Foreign Service from Georgetown University School of Foreign Services in DC, but he also has an MA in Judaica Studies from the Jewish Theological Seminary of America in New York, and an MBA from the University of Chicago Graduate School of Business. But it is with his MA in Jewish Theological Seminary in Judaica Studies that we have asked him to, and he has kindly accepted to do our invocation to kick off our meeting this evening. So, Rob.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. And it's a pleasure and a great, privilege and honor to be here in this session. A Jewish call to action, a Jewish call to climate action, is really talking about core Jewish values at its essence. And Jewish Jewish values that incorporate this go back to our earliest history. And I just wanted to leave you with some of the sources. And let's see. So many of you are familiar with from Leviticus, and when you reap the harvest of your land, you shall not reap all the way to the edges of your field, or gather the gleanings of your harvest. You shall not pick our vineyards bare, or gather the fallen fruit of your vineyard. You shall leave them for the poor and stranger. I am the Lord your God. So even in the Tanakh, the 5 books of Moses, there's a tremendous amount of sources that talk about charity, tzedakah, take care of your animals, take care of the people who work for you. So there's environmental sustainability and governance, in the Tanakh. And then if you look back through history and you say, what are the 5, some of the 5 most important mitzvot in the tradition, and the Jewish tradition, you have tzedakah. We translate it as righteousness. So the whole point about charity, well, sustainability is very important. It's a part of tzedakah. We're all familiar with tikkun olam, repair the world. Well, nothing speaks to repairing the world like solving the climate problem. Tzedek. Tzedek means the call to justice and fairness. And we know that an environmentally sustainable planet is an equity item, and it's a righteousness item. Gemilut Hasidim as loving kindness. Gemilut Hasidim calls for caring and compassion. Well, when we think about saving the environment, and having, clean air to breathe, that's fundamental in, caring about other people and having compassion for other people. And tikva, hope. So that we're here tonight, is a key part of that mitzvah, to have hope and that we can make an impact on the world and tikkun olam in our daily lives. And, we go back to tikkun olam. It's not upon you to finish the work, but you are not free to ignore it. And then Rabban Gamliel said, the world is established on three principles: truth, justice, and peace. As it is said, you shall administer truth, justice, and peace within your gates. So again, the appeal to a climate action and taking action for a sustainable planet is really administering truth, justice, and peace. And we all are familiar, if I'm not for myself, who is for me? If I care only for myself, what am I? If not now, when? Well, Diana, the call for climate action is right now. And then run to perform. Shimon ben Azzi, run to perform even a minor mitzvah. For one good deed draws in another good deed, and one transgression leads to another. For the reward of a good deed is a good deed, and the reward of sin is sin. So by taking one step and doing a good deed, fighting, sustainability, climate action leads to other great deeds, and it's a multiplier effect. So let us pray that our session tonight allows us to fulfill these basic components of our Jewish values. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Rob. That was really beautiful. Our first speaker tonight on the subject that we're addressing is Robert Root. Robert is a physician, specifically a psychiatrist. He also trained with former Vice President Al Gore and his group as a climate reality leader in 2019. Robert is a graduate of Yale School of Medicine and was the medical director of child and adolescent psychiatry at CPMC for 20 years. He's an experienced speaker about the science of climate change, its implications on our health, including climate anxiety in youth, and solutions that are ready at hand, political and personal. Robert?
All right, thank you, Carol. So I'm gonna share my screen, and please tell me if you can see the screen and hear me okay.
Yes to both.
Yep. Okay. So this is the Climate Reality Project, but before I jump into the talk, I do want to just share very briefly that I am extra delighted to give a talk at Sherith, Israel. When I moved here from New York City, literally 30 years ago next month, Sherith, Israel welcomed me. I lived across the street. Rabbi Weiner brought me right into his office. The first day I stopped by, my kids went to the preschool next door. I met my wife through YAD, and we were members for several years. So it is very special to me to connect again with Sherith Israel. My connection to climate change really got stimulated by this beautiful place, Yellowstone National Park. And one of the reasons that I now spend a lot of my time with climate-related education is because of this article in the New York Times from November 2018 that said Yellowstone Park, because of climate change, was changing in its character, landscape, and ecosystem, and that our children may not grow up to experience the beauty of this park as it was. And as a physician, as a parent, as a wildlife photographer, as a lover of nature, that was intolerable to me. And I signed up to join Climate Reality, and I took my son to Yellowstone a few months later. So this is our planet, our beautiful blue marble of a planet And as I like to say to a Jewish audience, this is truly the ultimate tikkun olam, to repair the world which is damaged, and we must do it. And we know that this is urgent. We know from the very recent COP meetings that our world is on the brink of catastrophic, irreversible climate change unless we act as a unified community of people from this planet. So there is true urgency. It is based in science. There is no question that human activity and fossil fuel emissions have created this problem. And as most of you know, the UN Secretary General said this is code red. So there's no time to waste. This is an image of the atmosphere of our planet. It is a thin, beautiful, but precarious atmosphere, much smaller than people might think. The problem is we are continually spewing dirty energy and fossil fuel emissions every day into this thin shell of our atmosphere. The science of climate change is pretty simple. The radiation of energy from the sun warms our planet. Some gets re-radiated to space, but the more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, the more heat is trapped, and therefore the Earth continues to warm. In simple terms, that is the science of climate change, and it's real. We also know the many contributors to greenhouse gases, from combustion engine cars and trucks, from industrial production. Coal plants are probably the worst perpetrator of high-level greenhouse gas emissions. But many of these sources can be changed, and we have the tools now to do it. If we look in California, transportation, buses, cars, far and away is the single biggest contributor of greenhouse gas emissions. And if we look at the three largest wedges on this pie, the generation of electric power, fossil fuel production, et cetera, we can handle 75 to 80% of this greenhouse gas emission right now by electrifying our sources of energy and upgrading our grid. This is doable. Again, for evidence, fossil fuel emissions and pollution have been warming the Earth based, and you can see this, this exponential increase, really most prevalent since World War II, more and more tons of CO2 on our atmosphere. And it absolutely correlates with this warming of the planet. These red bars are all deviations above the average temperatures of the global surface. When I give talks to high school groups, which is my favorite audience, I tell them every year you've been alive has been one of the hottest years in recorded human history. It's that significant. And actually, I'll update this slide. 2022 is now the year that is hottest on record. So this is increasing and ever more frequent and clear. And I'll also say, when we look at our beautiful planet, it's not only our atmosphere that is warming and being filled with greenhouse gases, so is the ocean. In fact, the vast majority of this increased heat is absorbed by the oceans and changes the chemistry of the ocean. It's affecting sea life, fish that people need in many parts of the world to eat for survival. And it's changing the acidity and therefore the capacity of the oceans to support human life. When we think about catastrophic storms, extreme weather, you know, it's really been these last several years that people have been increasingly aware and exposed. Look at the size of this Hurricane Irma compared to the island of Cuba, or on the upper left, the tip of Florida. These are massive storms, and they're occurring more frequently. And when we think of the basic Earth science, what we call the water cycle, that water, when it's heated, evaporates into the atmosphere. As it condenses in the sky, it comes down as precipitation, and then that precipitation runs into riverways or streams and back to the sea, and it repeats. One of the concerns is now, because of climate change, this water cycle is vastly accelerated or supercharged. So warm air holds more moisture. More moisture in the atmosphere creates bigger, more powerful, more energetic storms. And when those big storms reach the surface, they cause more flooding and landslides, and that reverberates. One thing I learned in 2019 when I trained with Al Gore's group was about this concept of an atmospheric river. And I thought, that's extraordinary. I'd never heard of it. And as you see, this is a continuous rainstorm for 2,500 miles from the Hawaiian Islands to California. I had not seen reference to atmospheric rivers in the news or anything that I've read, and I'm an avid reader of science, until this winter, when the Bay Area has had multiple atmospheric river storms, pronounced continuous storms. And the heat in the atmosphere that evaporates water from the oceans also deprives the land of adequate moisture. And that leads to another impact of climate change, which is drought. This is an image of what is part of the breadbasket in the state of São Paulo in Brazil, now no longer able to provide crops for food. The hotter the year, and the last 20 years have been the hottest on record, correlates almost perfectly with increased fire risk. And everyone in this room knows about the Northern California fires. I did a study, really one of the first studies in the United States, interviewing teenagers about their anxiety about climate change, and wildfires and sea level rise were the things that teens most were worried about, partly because so many people have now been exposed to them. You know, even in San Francisco, we've had the impact of these particulate matter from wildfires up north. We know it all too well. And the grouping of all these extreme weather events is increasing. So I'm going to talk about some of these really disturbing ideas just for another minute before I will shift to a lot of hopefulness. But I think it's important to state why this is so critical and why we have to act now. These are some of the major cities on the planet, many in Southeast Asia, that are large population cities, including Miami and New York City, that are at high risk for climate change-induced sea level rise. Even our Bay Area airports potentially could be underwater if sea level rise reaches 10 feet, which some estimates say could be likely before the end of the century. So when I talk about climate change, what motivates me most is thinking of this as a health issue, because it's not enough to get our communities mobilized just by the moral responsibility. Although with a Jewish audience, I think we have that culture, we have that history of taking action because it's right. But I also emphasize climate change has been deemed by some of the most prominent medical groups as a true emergency. This is the health, not only of ourselves now, but the health of our children into the future. In fact, it is the greatest health risk that we face around the world. And just very briefly, some of the things that I want to just touch on are impacts related to heat on communities. Heat stress affects vulnerable communities, inner city communities without adequate shade, without tree cover, the elderly, the young, the homeless. Air pollution is part of fossil fuel emissions. It's not only warming, it's pollution. And I'll come back to that in a moment. And as I mentioned, drought will increase the risk for access to water and food. So who is most vulnerable to all of these risks? We know it's, people of color, people in inner city, the poor, the homeless, etc. But air pollution around the world from fossil fuel emissions kills almost 9 million people a year worldwide. That is utterly unacceptable. And there are multiple health effects, including on mental health, which I won't go into in any detail, but I believe very strongly in the risk to children and adults, sense of well-being, the anxiety, and even, climate change related depression and anxiety that people feel. There's a huge connection between the health of our environment and human health. And forgive me if I just briefly show this mosquito, the greatest predator in the history of the world. The mosquito will thrive with climate change, and infectious diseases like malaria will declare themselves in regions that have been malaria-free due to global warming unless we take action. So this is a slide that just shows you medical health, mental health, community health are affected by all of these issues. This is the study I did in 2019 that showed 88% of teens that I interviewed, almost 100 teens even back then, were significantly concerned about climate change, and 2/3 already had clinical symptoms of anxiety. In the years since, that has only multiplied. So when we think of this term eco-anxiety, it's an anxiety about, will our planet be able to provide for us in the future? Something none of us have ever had to think about before. And it's a reasonable question. You know, it makes sense that we would be worried. But I want to also emphasize, when we are stressed or anxious about something, the right amount of anxiety can mobilize us. And that is critical. We have to take this seriously, and we have to channel it into what we can do. The last piece of dark information I want to share, my other passion is wildlife. I gave a wildlife photography talk last night to a group in San Francisco, and included this idea that because of climate change, 50% of the biodiversity of our planet, and these are some of my images, some of the animals that I'm sure all of us love, these iconic animals, are all vulnerable if we do not work together. And I want to really now briefly focus on the idea that we do have solutions. We do know what we can do. Wind energy is increasing in many parts of the world. And theoretically, the energy harnessed by wind could power all the energy needs of our planet. And the cost is coming down. The solar panel installations are going up exponentially. And this is a limitless source of energy. And the cost has come down remarkably. When I trained with Al Gore, and he does trainings in person, he is so dedicated and involved. But when I did my training, the cost of clean energy was coming down, but still slightly more expensive than natural gas and certain forms of fossil fuel. Now it is cheaper, and it's getting even more inexpensive. One of the greatest arguments against our readiness for clean energy has been the capacity to store clean energy. And as you can see, this forecast, again, is exponential, that we will have more and more capacity with each passing year. So clean energy is here, it's cheaper, it's healthier. It can even be supplied in one of the poorest countries on earth, South Sudan, where some villages are able to power their energy needs with solar panels. This is a remarkable idea. 1 hour of solar energy reaching the earth can supply the energy needs of our planet for a year. This is limitless. And it increases jobs and opportunity. I'm going to just touch on the legislation. The Inflation Reduction Act, which is a surprising name, has allocated an enormous amount of money for clean energy and climate solutions, more than any other legislation in history anywhere in the world. It has some problems, but it is a landmark opportunity. And if we use the IRA for our homes, for our schools, for our synagogues, for our buildings and cities, and access these funds, the likelihood of reducing our emissions is extraordinarily enhanced. So we can shape our climate future. I am aware of the frightening implications, but I deeply, deeply believe in the opportunity to make things better. And this is, in a nutshell, the most important thing I want to share with this audience is the word aardvark. And I know that sounds absurd, but when I gave a talk to the Jewish Community High School last year, the night before I gave the talk, this word, as I was going to sleep, this word came into my mind as an acronym to help teens remember the most important parts of climate solutions. So I'm going to show you what these letters stand for, but remember aardvark. The double A means activism and advocacy. And just briefly, this is the Youth Climate March in San Francisco a few years ago. And this is my group, the Climate Reality Group. Marching, protesting, writing to Congress really makes a difference. And if we can get to net zero emissions, scientists now estimate within just a few years, global temperatures will stop increasing. That is doable. We have the technology. The R in aardvark is for resilience. We may have to change some of the infrastructure in cities like New York and Miami that are at risk for flooding. And just like certain Native American communities in Alaska just receive funds to relocate to safer settings away from coastal flooding. The D in aardvark is for what we call drawdown solutions. There's a whole project called Project Drawdown that tells us the relative contributions of actions and their impact to reduce climate risk. And if you look just briefly, the big red wedge, the largest section has to do with reducing food waste and composting. Because if we throw food, organic material into landfills, it will get degraded into methane, which is a very, very potent greenhouse gas. And just by reducing our food waste, and as San Francisco does, composting, New York City finally is about to start, that has a big impact on reducing climate change risk. The V in aardvark is voting for politicians and candidates who believe in and will fight for climate justice and fairness and clean energy. The A are the actions that we can take. For example, this is a friend of mine from Climate Reality installing solar panels, and his daughter learning to charge their electric car. Not everyone can afford that yet, though it is getting cheaper. But that's not the only thing we can do. A very simple intervention, which is very powerful, is changing our electric relationship from PG&E to Clean Power SF. When I did this 3 or 4 years ago, I had to pay a little bit more to get 100% clean energy, that when I paid my bill, every dollar went to buy clean energy for the Bay Area grid. Now, clean energy is cheaper. And all it takes is 3 minutes online, and every dollar your home pays or the synagogue pays can be clean energy. So things that families can do are eat plant-based meals more frequently, compost, reduce waste, reduce the risk of methane from the decaying organic material. And I'm not going to talk about redirecting our money. That's going to be something that our expert next speakers are going to do. But that's the R in Aardvark, because we as consumers and investors have power. But I want to emphasize the last letter in Aardvark is this notion of keeping our connection and commitment. I feel like I am part of an international movement. I've connected with young people. I've connected with people in South America, Africa, Asia. It inspires me. I feel the connection across what I call cultures and continents. And that keeps us motivated. That keeps us engaged. Families, children, everyone has an age-appropriate action that they can take to feel that they are addressing their concerns, helping in whatever way we can, whatever our skills are. We do need to talk to children and to reassure them that we can work together. We can join organizations and rely on them like the Sierra Club. So what I say is we can make a world of difference. There's nothing more morally important. There's nothing more critical than protecting our children, our planet, our future. And I'm going to close on this image, which is perfect for this audience. This is a sunset from a boat in Tel Aviv, the very first night of my very first trip to Israel, right before the pandemic. When I took this image, and I'm going to close on this, it was of a beautiful sunset in Israel on the Mediterranean. I finally made it to Israel. But when I look at this image now, I see not only the beauty, but I see this orange glow in the sky. And it reminds me of that day in San Francisco when the wildfires created this surreal sky. So this is both to symbolize to me, and I hope to you, the beauty of our planet and the precariousness that we can and must do everything we can to solve the climate crisis. And I will stop there.
Robert, that was terrific. Thank you. Love the clarity and how you took an incredibly complex topic of climate change and broke it down into, in such a short period of time, something that we could, clearly understand and connect the dots. And also with Aardvark, the hope that you bring with the ideas that we can put into action right away. And so we need to include in your bio a photographer as well. Enjoyed your photographs. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you.
So our next speaker is Muriel McDonald. Muriel is from Dayenu.org, and it is Dayenu.org that we joined in our rally at BlackRock last year in San Francisco, our first Dayenu All Our Might action. And so Muriel is our local expert from Dayenu, and so Muriel has all sorts of ideas in terms of kind of connecting the science and the health to the investment aspect of this, and aligning our Jewish values with our investments, you know, in a clear, respectful, and productive way, and how to have those conversations with our advisors in the financial world. And so, Muriel, take it away, please.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me, everyone. I'm going to share my screen really quickly here as well. A second to make sure that looks all right. All right. Can you all see that there? I think you can.
Yes.
Okay. I'm seeing nods. Fabulous. So hi, thank you, Carol, for that lovely introduction. And thank you, Robert, for your thorough overview of the climate crisis. I learned a lot during your presentation, and it's always awesome to see how folks talk about it. So thank you so much. I am on Daynu's staff as the national organizer. So I support folks all across the country to organize meaningfully on the climate crisis in a Jewish way. And I support Daynu circles, which are small groups of people, often based in congregations, taking action on the climate crisis together. And that includes this circle at Sherith, Israel. So just so happy to be working with you all. And thank you for having me here tonight. I feel called to confront the climate crisis myself because I am in love with the earth and all of the complexities of life that are beyond our comprehension. And because as a Jew, we are called to pursue justice. And as we know, the climate crisis is a deep issue of justice, and working on that feels very deeply Jewish for me. So today I will be talking about a key strategy that we've identified for confronting the climate crisis, which is using finance to stop the expansion of fossil fuels. And before I get into the weeds with that, I'm going to back up a little bit and just share a bit about Daynu and why I'm talking to you all about this today. So Daynu is a Jewish call to climate action. For those who are unfamiliar, Daynu is a multi-generational Jewish movement that confronts the climate crisis with spiritual audacity and bold political action. Daynu supports a network of nearly 100 Daynu circles, which, as I mentioned, are small groups of Jewish climate organizers across the country, including the Sherith Israel Daynu Circle. And Daynu circles and leaders address the underlying causes of the climate crisis by advocating for policies at the federal and state levels. We have some interesting stuff happening in California at the state level this year, and urging candidates and elected officials to take bold action. And relevant to today's conversation, we work to end the era of fossil fuels so we can build a clean energy future for all generations to come. So I want to talk Jewishly for a moment. Robert Chaikin set us up wonderfully at the start of this, and I so appreciated that teaching. Daynu's fossil fuel finance work, the campaign we're talking about today, is named All Our Might after the Ve'ahavta prayer in the Shema. So we are told to love God with all of our heart, with all of our soul, and with all of our might. Who's familiar with that prayer? Who's like, oh yes, I've said this, right? Of course, all of us. And so we must bring all of our might, bechol meodecha, to end the era of fossil fuels and build a clean energy future that we all deserve. So fittingly, bechol meodecha is also sometimes interpreted to mean with all of our possessions or with all of our money. So not only are we confronting the climate crisis with all of our might, we're also confronting it with all of our money. So before I get into the details of how we do that, let's talk for a minute, which I won't spend much time on since it was covered so beautifully in the previous presentation. Let's just ground ourselves in what's at stake, right? We talked about this. The CO2 levels in the atmosphere are way up above pre-industrial levels. And that means we're facing all these extreme impacts: heat, flooding, more extreme weather events, and this last square here, threat multiplier. Essentially, it's a threat multiplier for people who are already vulnerable. So Bob mentioned health impacts for people who are already have asthma, for example. These are threat multipliers. For people who live on fence line or frontline communities with fossil fuel plants who have already been harmed and have health impacts from living near those sites, these events are threat multipliers. And of course, we are not yet above 1.5 degrees. That's the level we're trying to stay under. But even with just 1 degree of warming, we're already seeing a lot of these impacts here in California. More than 100 million people, a third of the US population, including, I would bet, almost all of us in this room, have personally experienced climate impacts in the past couple of years. And of course, the 2018 Day of No Sun in the Bay comes to mind as, I know for me, a pivotal point from being worried about the climate crisis to doing something about it. And I can attest that I felt a lot better once I started taking action. It felt a lot better than just staying up at night worrying. So I won't get any more into the details of these, each of these, since we've already kind of covered them. But I do want to talk about what we need to do to stay below that 1.5 degrees and not have any worse impacts than we're already having. And really, to do that, we need to do two things. One of them is invest in good things, invest in clean energy solutions, right? Those batteries that we were talking about, solar and wind, et cetera. And the other thing that we need to do is keep it in the ground, right? No matter how much we invest in clean energy, if we keep extracting, refining, and burning fossil fuels, we will surpass 1.5 degrees. If we, so we basically are doing two things, investing in the good and stopping the bad. So some good news, also alluded to. After more than 30 years of hemming and hawing, Congress finally passed the first ever piece of federal climate legislation, the Inflation Reduction Act, which was signed into law by President Biden last August, and it includes $370 billion, the largest investment in clean energy, environmental justice, transportation, and energy efficiency in U.S. history. This is a huge deal. And Dayenu circles, including leaders and staff and partners, maybe some of you, worked tirelessly to pass this first ever piece of comprehensive federal legislation, and we succeeded. So that's a huge deal. I added at the last minute a few photos of what I say when we helped pass it, what I mean. This is a photo in San Francisco. We held a number of actions around Rosh Hashanah, now 2 years ago, when we thought we were just about to pass something, but it wasn't quite there yet. Of course, then it took a whole other year until the next August to pass, which was a nail-biting year for many of us who are tracking this. But we gathered in San Francisco outside of Dianne Feinstein's office to say, you need to go big on climate and to give our senators the hizuk, the courage to go big on climate and really deliver something major. So I don't know if anyone was at this action. This is LA. They did it around the same time. This is Boston. They showed up in the pouring rain. And this is New York, where we had over 300 people, and Senator Schumer himself showed up. His congregation was part of the organizing committee. And of course, of all the folks who needed the hizuk, the courage, and the strength to go back and push and fight for something, maybe he needed it from us the most. So proud of showing up at this pivotal moment and showing that this was something that over 80% of Americans wanted and were demanding, and really give that political cover, shift that political window so that something like this could be possible. So we have the science and the technology and the public on our side, and now we have the IRA, federal climate legislation, and clean energy technology is spreading far and wide, and emissions are already starting to flatten, which is huge. I don't know if you all are in circles where people are talking about buying cars. My age group is right at that age where we're ready to buy a vehicle, and I can tell you that in my personal experience, even the subsidies for electric vehicles have really shifted the consumer patterns just from my observed experience. But as I mentioned, there's a catch. The window to address the climate crisis is short, and getting only partway to our goal just by investing in the good means that we will continue at unsustainable levels. So in order to reach our goal of net zero emissions well ahead of 2050 and to meet our Paris obligations, we cannot only invest in clean energy and climate solutions. Unfortunately, we have no just carrots, we also have to have sticks. We need to address the other half of the equation, and that's slashing carbon pollution, which is driving the climate crisis. The US and other oil, gas, and coal producing countries, basically, it's simple. We have to keep the majority of fossil fuels in the ground and unburned. Fossil fuels, as we know, coal, oil, and gas, that includes natural gas, which could also be called methane gas, are the leading contributors to climate change. They're responsible for over 75% of global greenhouse gas emissions, and they also disproportionately harm the health of marginalized groups, Black, Brown, Indigenous, and rural poor, who are most likely to live near the resource reserves, in the shadow of a polluting plant, or along the route of a pipeline. And fossil fuel companies have spent decades sowing doubt about climate science and blocking any kind of emissions regulations for obvious reasons. They want to keep profiting and avoid shouldering the costs of these climate impacts. And despite knowing about climate change for many decades, the majority of fossil fuel companies haven't taken any major steps to retool their core business, which is extraction, to meet the clean energy future. And meanwhile, renewable energy continues to grow exponentially cheaper and outpace the fossil fuel industry. So I have an equation, an overly simple equation, perhaps, but what keeps oil and gas and coal companies afloat? It is readily available capital in the form of bonds, loans, and underwriting from the largest banks and asset managers in the world. And the leading investors in fossil fuels are based right here in North America. And so as the world transitions to this affordable and readily available energy of renewables, fossil fuels investments are actually representing an increasing risk to their portfolios. So Dainu has dubbed the 7 largest US banks and asset managers responsible for financing the vast majority of fossil fuel extraction, the Schmutzy Sheva, or the Dirty 7. And I think I skipped a slide here, but we actually took action last year. Here we go. Will it play if I hit play? Outside some of these banks. And this is what Carol alludes to. We gathered in San Francisco outside BlackRock around Passover this time, not around Rosh Hashanah, to call on these asset managers and banks to stop investing in fossil fuels, right? These are actually not photos from San Francisco. These are photos from the action I happen to be at in my hometown in Washington, D.C., where we marched to the 4 biggest banks that were funding fossil fuels. I did not mean to stop sharing right there. I apologize. To share. And I just really want to emphasize here that we are not trying to demonize these banks and these investors. In fact, we believe that they have a really crucial role to play in addressing the climate crisis and have a tremendous amount of power to do so. And instead of financing fossil fuels, these global investors could be a force for good, phasing out their investments in oil, gas, and coal, and ramping up investments in the clean energy that we need to power the future. These banks and global asset managers aren't stuck in the past like fossil fuel companies, right? Fossil fuel companies have refused to retool their business model. These banks and asset managers are prepared to do that, but they are slow to change. They're big institutions. And that's where we come in. We have an opportunity as their clients and their customers to be that extra push and the wind in their sails. So it's easy to get cynical about this stuff and say, how can I as an individual have any impact on these giant multinational financial institutions? And you'd be right. I think there's a limit to how much we can do as individuals. Environmental author and activist Bill McKibben likes to say, the most important thing an individual can do is be less of an individual and join together with others in movements large enough to make change. So that's what the All Our Might campaign is all about. Jewish communities like this one are coming together to confront the climate crisis and the era of fossil fuels and build a clean energy future together. And American Jewish institutions, federations, foundations, synagogues, JCCs, movements, and more have a crucial role to play in confronting the climate crisis and helping us finance the transition from fossil fuels to clean energy. So every Jewish institution has a bank account, and many have endowments or investments that help sustain our work for the long term. And we want to ensure those banks and assets managers that we use also sustain the planet for the long term in the spirit of Lador Vador, from generation to generation, by ending their financial support for the fossil fuel industry. And most of us are probably funding oil, coal, and gas companies right now without even knowing it or thinking about it. And that's because banks and asset managers handling our institutions' money are channeling a portion of our investments towards these polluting industries. But of course, we have the power to change this. And so the All Our Might campaign has a roadmap here. That includes, you'll see the last step is moving our money. A lot of people don't even get to that step. We start with researching. Where are we keeping our money? Educating ourselves about it. Engaging with our financial institutions and asking them to make this change. And then if they cannot make that change and refuse to make that change, that's when we start talking about making a plan to move our money by working with our colleagues and our financial advisors and our asset managers to do so. I skipped a little bit of this, which is, I just want to go back for a second. And I know I see Carol, I'm almost out of time, so I'll wrap it up soon. But as part of our All Our Might campaign and as part of this work, Diana actually put out a report about this. I will share a link in the chat when I'm done speaking. And I really invite you all, if you're interested in learning more about this, to take a look. It is all about we examined Jewish communal assets and our exposure to fossil fuels, just to really set a baseline for this work so that we can, as a community, work to shift that. So Jewish communal assets and investments total around 100 billion. And according to our report, we examined 50 major Jewish foundations, federations, and movement organizations, which is, you'll see, roughly 5.5%, which is 34.7 billion of that 100 billion. And of the organizations we examined, we found that roughly 5.5% of those assets are invested in fossil fuels. And this is less than the market average of 5.68%, but it still represents billions of dollars that are held by our Jewish communities that are currently funding fossil fuels. And the alternative, of course, is that this money could instead be invested in clean energy and climate solutions. So our proposal is to move that money out of fossil fuels. There's a lot of examples of pension funds. Harvard and Yale University have taken this step. The MacArthur and Ford Foundations have taken this step. There's a lot of examples of groups moving their money out of fossil fuels. And so far, $40 trillion worth of assets have done this. And that money talks, and 40 trillion is a lot of noise. And we propose that our institutions become part of that noise. Let me wrap up here. So, to bring us back, climate change is happening. We must transition from fossil fuels to clean energy. Banks, asset managers, and investors have a key role to play in all of this. Jewish institutions can engage our investors and move our money. And to start, we have to find out where we're invested. And I know we're going to hear from in a minute from Robert Chaikin about how to do this on a personal level as well. Diana is focused on an institutional strategy, but I do really support doing this on a personal level as well. I think it can really support a deeper understanding and alignment with doing this work overall. And I am so grateful to Robert, who holds expertise in this area and can really share at a level that I'm not an expert in, on how to think about this and approach it. And then together we can raise a moral voice rooted in love for each other, for our planet, and for all future generations. So thank you so much for letting me, and I apologize if I went on a little long. Back to you, Carol.
Muriel, thank you very much. Really appreciate your, first of all, Dainu.org, all that it brings to this important issue, and really appreciate your honing straight into what we can do using the power of the dollar and our investments and our money to address this problem, both on institutional level and a personal level. Well, we've come full circle in our speakers tonight, back to Robert Chaikin. So a little bit more about Rob. He's Vice President and Family Wealth Advisor at Morgan Stanley in Los Gatos, California, where he is able to advise clients on investing with impact based on their religious, spiritual, and life values. Rob is active in the community. He's a commissioner on the Santa Clara County Human Rights Commission, and he's served as a two-term co-chair of the Jewish Community Relations Council of Jewish Silicon Valley, and is currently a board member of the Jewish Silicon Valley, where he chairs the investment committee. So, Rob, floor is yours now.
Okay, can you hear me? Okay. Can you hear me, Carol?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, great. Okay, great. Well, thank you very much, everyone. And again, it's a real pleasure to be here. I think Muriel and Robert did an excellent job of setting the context, the need for action, and how serious it is, and also the context of there's a lot of things that you can do collectively and as well as individually. So my job is a little bit, I think, easier than theirs because there's never been a better time to in terms of personal investments and investing with your values, as opposed to 20 years ago, when people were trying to be conscious of the environment and it came to individual investments. You really had to sacrifice financial returns. And but the industry and environmentally sustainable investing has come such a long way that like I said, it's now very, very easy to align your portfolio with your values, and also meet your financial objectives at the same time. So I'm going to just focus on what are the things you can be doing in your portfolio that can help you align yourself in terms of the climate challenge. And none of this really involves, like Muriel said, demonizing anybody or anyone. What would it involve? And it doesn't involve something like restructuring, selling everything. It's none of that. It's basically just coming up with a plan and taking advantage of the various opportunities, whether you have $1,000 or you have a larger amount in your 401k. There's again ways to align your investing with your values again in a over time, and nothing radical needs to be done. It's really basically something that you do on your timeline. I wanted to share my screen right now and see. Do you see my screen? Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, we do.
Okay,
thank you, Rob.
Okay, thank you. So, we talk about investing with impact. What we're talking about, the intention to see a measurable, positive social or environmental impact alongside a market rate financial return. So this is really what I'm saying. It's you can meet your financial goals and meet your impact goals. So that's what we call the combination investing with impact. I'm going to show you in a few minutes that, again, to invest your values, you don't have to suffer a less financial return. In fact, what you'll see is that many of the environmentally friendly climate innovators have had a better return than the general market as a whole. There's different themes. People invest by faith. There's a Jewish value lens that you can screen investments for. Racial equality. We're talking about climate action here and what you can do in that arena, which is basically support the transition to a lower carbon economy by considering exposures to climate solutions, environmental leaders, and fossil fuel reserves in portfolios. And some of the things that Muriel and Robert talked about. What I want you to know is that you are not alone. If this is what you want to do, and so you want to, manage your money, invest your money according to your values, sustainability is the idea whose time has come. So just show you some statistics. 85% of active individual investors describe themselves as interested in sustainable investing. So that's a lot. Millennials, 95% of those, and millennial individual investors describe themselves as interested in sustainable investing. So 95% of asset owners are either integrating environmentally, socially, and that's where the climate action comes in. They're already integrating this in their portfolios. And there's different motivations, and it doesn't, whatever the motivation. Some people invest in climate, reducing their exposure to fossil fuels and investing in clean energy from a risk management standpoint. It's like because their feeling is that there is no strong future in fossil fuels. Some of them, people have different missions. And as I said, the return potential of climate and environmentally sustainable investing has actually outperformed the broader market over the last 10 years. And there's some people are moving this direction because, as Muriel said, the policies and regulations are changing. And people, individuals, are demanding that, like was mentioned in different movements and protests and for change. So when we focus on climate action, okay, so the key is that it's very easy to screen a portfolio or to purchase an investment that doesn't have any fossil fuels companies in it. So that would be the number one thing is you can buy a mutual fund, an exchange traded fund, or an individual stock, and that's screened for not having any investment in fossil fuels. Plus, if you have current mutual funds, you can also have those screened against any of their, what kind of ownership do they have fossil fuels? And some of the ESG guides will actually give different companies and mutual funds a score. But you can get mutual funds right now that do not have any fossil fuel companies in them. Then there's the integration, so this starts with, okay, this is what you're going to eliminate for your portfolio, reducing your portfolio. Now you're going to start integrating, some of the environmental, social, and governance criteria relative to climate action. And then the more positive phase is climate solutions, identifying companies on revenue generated from products and services that seek to make a positive contribution. So you go from the one extreme of screening companies that don't have and reduce them in your portfolio that have fossil fuels, all the way to the positive side. And again, this is something that can easily be done. Whether you're working with a mutual fund company or another financial advisor firm, everyone is set up in many cases, some more than others, to do this type of screening. In terms of climate action, these are the things like would be the number one screen is that, impact objectives. So there's screens for, what companies are, they have a climate footprint. And those are, let's say our firm, for example, produces statistics about our carbon footprint, and many of the firms that are ranked according to ESG standards have to produce those. And so these are the things that you can concentrate in, in an exchange traded fund and focus on these. And these are the areas of a concern that you're addressing: carbon, underground, as Muriel talked about, oil and gas, and environment. On some of the screens for companies, they'll list the worst 5% polluters. And then this the other phase of it. Phase two is a circular economy, natural resource solutions, alternative energy, sustainable. These are all again ways you can invest with a very small amount of money with these objectives. If your concerns are chemicals, oil and gas, and again, companies are ranked at the bottom 5%. And then, conservation and biodiversity. So these are all ways that you can focus your investments on, I think, in a very simple manner. Now, I want to get to the point here. I talked about you don't have to sacrifice return. Here's an analysis, a return of a fossil fuel-free S&P 500 index. And how it's performed similar to the larger S&P 500. And you'll see that the S&P 500 without fossil fuel companies, you can see right here, has beaten the broader market S&P 500. So you can see for 15 years, that's been the case, 10 years, 5 years, on the 3-year, no. So right now it's about even. But the point is that for the long haul, you're actually not sacrificing return. And that's, I think, something that's important. And here it's about, risk measurement. So you're not taking on any more risk by being environmentally friendly. So that's one of the things that I want to establish, that, as I said earlier, maybe 20 years ago, you had to suffer returns for being, climate conscious or environmentally or sustainability, but you no longer have to sacrifice that. The returns for environmentally friendly, climate change oriented companies are even surpassing the standard companies that do not pay attention to this. Here's another way of measuring that, the returns. Again, this is an index of the Financial Times of London, Environmental Opportunities All Share Index. So these are all basically environmentally conscious companies, and talking about the solutions that we discussed, the solar power, ex-fossil fuel. So there's an index of these opportunistic, environmentally sustainable companies versus the broader market as a whole. And they have an index including all stocks. And you can see the environmental opportunities index, again, is outperformed the global index of all companies in it. And you can see for most of these years, every bracket. So again, I just want to emphasize that when we talk about making changes to climate change oriented companies, that reducing your portfolio exposure to fossil fuels, purchasing more user-friendly or environmentally friendly funds, you don't have to sacrifice the return. And one of the things, I use, my company, these are the charts that I use, but, what we do is, there's many other companies that do this as well. And it's a very easy conversation to have with your if you have a current financial advisor, you just have to say, hey, this is what I want to, have in my portfolio, and this is my goals and objectives. If most of them should be able to accommodate you, and if they don't, pick up your wallet, because it's not necessary. You don't have to. You should be able to invest at any major institution with your values. And these are some of the screens. So most major companies work with different ESG screens that they can filter, the companies that you currently have, and also recommend funds that meet your objectives. This is just how you go about it. So there's literally everything you possibly can invest in there's something that has a sustainability factor. So you can buy money markets bank money markets that have high climate activism scores. In other words, so they don't have lending to fossil fuel companies. So just even a pure, simple money market can be environmentally friendly. You can buy now, if you're bonds and you've done municipal bonds before, tax-free income, well, you can get what's called green bonds, which have to certify that it's only climate sustainable in that particular bond. So most companies have research desks where they can screen stocks based on what your goals are. In this case, climate action. And, you can start participating in some things that are, ETFs, minimum investment for an ETF, a climate sustainable ETF, you can invest in for $1,000. Mutual funds the same way, or there's literally a mutual fund for any type of value that you want to express, and they're readily available, and the research is available for that. And then, larger, you can do like, you're talking about hedge funds and larger blocks of investment. There's hedge funds now that only do climate-friendly investments. So it runs the gamut from small to large. And it becomes a very, very easy conversation to have with your financial advisor. I myself, probably of most of my conversations about climate change and thematic investing, sustainability, really comes from clients ask me, well, what can I do about this? and by talking to them, I'll understand if that's a goal. I'll discuss it and analyze the portfolio. But I'm saying you can do this with virtually, you should be able to do this with any firm on that level. And then, there's the last thing I want to say to summarize is that this whole theme of climate change is definitely, a Jewish value. And I think we've established it, that Robert and Muriel have talked about. And so, you can, in the context of Jewish values, there's screens that basically, allow you to line your portfolio through, Jewish values with other factors like, people, anti-Israel companies can be removed from them. So you have a wide range of ways to not only take care of your concerns and your values regarding the environment and climate change, but also align to Jewish values. So that really summarizes what I wanted to say, and I hope that if there's any questions, I'll be glad to answer those.
Why isn't that?
Rob, thank you. You're making it easy on us by describing, the reality of what's available to us out there and sorting through investing in moving away from fossil fuels and investing in green and climate-friendly energy sources. So thank you for that. At this time, if you have questions, feel free to just raise your hand either physically or by using the reaction raise your hand on your screen, or put a question in the chat. We have about 10 minutes, so a little bit more to do that. So now's your chance to ask any of our speakers questions that are on your mind. Well, everybody did such a great job. Okay, so here we have one from Alan, and I'll just read this, if that's okay, Alan. As a consumer, how can we find suppliers, companies, et cetera, that we can support? For example, I know that Apple is 100% renewable energy in all of its stores and most of its other facilities with a goal of 100% renewable energy. Mm-hmm. Such a list of companies and how they support the climate challenge would be helpful to us to make decisions on how to spend by individuals. This, anybody can take this, but it sounds like a Rob Chaikin kind of question.
Yeah, I can provide you with, different, there's different ESG screens. So we use some of the common ones, that I think that they're most widespread, that basically ranks companies on different things, on climate, and also like their carbon footprint, their quality. So they have different rankings. So I can send to you, Carol, one of those screens, and then you can send it out to the distribution list. So this would be something what Alan is talking about, a screen that basically ranks companies on their environmental, actually an environmental score.
Okay, terrific. Thanks, Rob. Okay. Anybody that has a physical hand up? Ollie, do you see anybody? I'm not at the moment, but I do see another chat question. I do not. Okay. So Carol Weinstein asks, or she says, thank you very much. This was really useful. I need to duck out. Really appreciate the chance to sit in. So it wasn't a question, comment, very nice comment. One of the challenges of waiting until the end to raise questions is some of the questions that might come up are are lost by the end with new thoughts.
Bill, do you have a question?
Yeah, I just typed it in. I missed the whole talk, I'm sorry, for various reasons, but have third-party tax participation rules in sustainable systems investments changed, or do they continue as they have been before the Inflation Reduction Act?
So this might be either a Robert Root or a Rob Chaikin question. Do either one of you want to?
Well, one of the things that I thought Muriel was talking about that a little bit about policy changes. Is that I think that was along with what the policy changes in the tax treatment accounting rules. So I think Muriel was addressing that.
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, the question is, there were rules for third-party investments in sustainable projects, for example, installing a big solar collector system in which, and I'm familiar with one particular scheme in which the company which was going to do it was going to charge a rate for their supply of electricity to the client. And a part of the payback which allowed this to go forward was that there was some unnamed third party, maybe some part of the company involved that was supplying the collectors and installing them, maybe somebody that was truly third party who is going to collect the tax break that came with the system. And I'm wondering if that has changed.
I'm not sure. The Inflation Reduction Act was a huge bill that did a lot of things. Some of the incentives are tax incentives, and that has resulted in changes to tax rules. And some of the incentives are like not through tax rebates, are like using other mechanics to spur clean energy. If you want to get really in the know about tax, I would check out the IRS website, Inflation Reduction Act page, which I think covers all of the changes to tax law that are a result of the Inflation Reduction Act. I am not an expert. I've shared the link in the chat. I hope that's helpful. But yeah, I can't advise on something like that. I apologize.
You're sending me back to the salt mines. I got through about 400.
I apologize for sending you a link to the IRS.
I went through about 450 pages of that act and did not see the change. But that doesn't mean I could have missed it, and either by passing over it or not getting there.
Well, I just want to ask a question.
The project could have proceeded with this. And I'm wondering if it's changed.
I want to just say one thing on that, is that I think also what you're referring to, in a particular scenario that you said, you talked about it, there was a big fraud case where the third party company was setting the equipment up and really sending companies, large companies, the credits. And it turns out they weren't really making the equipment. They weren't delivering the equipment as they promised. And, some big companies were buying these solar units and booking the credit. And it was like a big Ponzi scheme. I mean, big one. So the IRS, I can tell you this, the IRS came down with some rulings about how third parties interface and how it has to be an economic transaction. So I will say this about that, is that the rules are tighter because of some of the recent fraud cases that the IRS came with. So there is more regulation on that. They're still encouraging the investment, but it's gotten tightened up.
If you have any links to that set of new considerations, if you could send them on either to Carol or to me.
Okay. Who is that?
I'm at walschuler@hotmail.com. WALSCHULER@hotmail.com.
Got it. Okay, we'll do.
Thanks.
Muriel, did you want to address the next question that came up by Alan on the chat, please?
Yeah, I see a question from Alan in the chat that is, can any of the speakers comment about the various California legislation bills that we learned at the RAC California session that Sherith hosted recently? I know you guys hosted that. It's so cool. We are working closely with the RAC. I, off the top of my head, am not 100% sure if the bills you learned about are the California bills that I'm tracking, but I wanted to answer this because there actually is a pretty cool opportunity to engage in a lobby day up on in Sacramento coming up this coming Tuesday, May 16th, for 3 bills this session. They may or may not be the ones that you guys were talking about with the RAC, but they are all related. And I'll just share that link here really quickly. This is actually just a form to sign up, but it's kind of the page I could find quickly that would give you, I think, info about these bills. If anyone's interested, I will be going up to Sacramento on this coming Tuesday. I will share, you can reach out to Carol, or I'll share my email in the chat at the end of this, and I'd be happy to see you up there. So I also see Bill Shore has raised his hand, perhaps to help answer the question.
Bill?
Yeah, so I've been involved, as Helene has, also with the RAC bills that we've been supporting. None of them have passed. They're all in progress. SB 12, Senator Stern's bill, is hopefully going to make it through the Senate. We're also planning possibly a lobby day, maybe in August. The meeting an hour ago just had a meeting about that to see where the bills stand. SB 49, Senator Becker's bill, that's the solar and parking lots bill. And that's still in process. They're now still all in their original chambers, and hopefully will pass through the Senate and get to the Assembly. And we'll be sending out notices about that. We actually will be having a meeting with the chair of the Senate Finance Committee, Senator Portofino. I think that's right, Portofino, next a week from today at 4:30 to 5, and we'll be sending notices about that for people to join in that meeting. We would like a good attendance at that meeting to show support for getting this through the Senate, the state Senate. And then there's also the SB 615, which is the electrical vehicle battery reuse and recycling bill. I'm not quite sure of the exact status of that. I think, like most of the bills, it's still in the original chambers, and hopefully will pass and get to the Assembly. Now, I don't know, Muriel, if you have more updates about that, any of those.
Sounds like you're tracking it great, Bill. And they're actually, I'm recalling that RAC is championing a slightly different suite of bills than we are, but they're all great bills. And the ones we're going to lobby day for, which are in the link I shared, are different. And like get at a slightly different piece of the puzzle, but just so happy you all are working on that, and thanks for tracking it.
It's a pretty invigorating process, active. Yeah, thank you. There will be more information coming. There's a notice will be coming out tomorrow from RAC. I'll send it to Carol, and then we can distribute it to all the people on this call.
Excellent.
The voting part of Aardvark. This presentations were just terrific. And the voting is, of course, very essential. So working on that.
Hear, hear. Thank you, Bill. So we've got here at Sherith Israel in the Bay Area, we have wonderful partners in Dianu, as well as RAC California. So we're well covered, and we've got a lot of options, a lot of places for action. Thank you all again for being here, and thank you so much to the speakers, to Robert Root and Muriel McDonald, and of course, Rob Chaikin and Ollie. Thank you for your tech support tonight. We really appreciate it. Hope everybody has a good evening, the rest of your evening. And just so that you know, this has been recorded. If you know of folks that were unable to make it for whatever reason, let them know that this is available for them. So with that, thank you, and good night.
Thank you, everyone. Terrific.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you.